to speak, if no one prays, these very stones cry out, I am.
Shalom, hello again. Our location on this series of archaeology is a fascinating archaeological site. This is the burnt house, the house of the Catros family of 70 AD. We know exactly who they were. We found stamps they used to stamp letters and so forth in this house, which was burnt by the Romans after the siege of the temple. 30 days afterward, they came up this hill, burnt this house, left their weapons, and the artifacts of the house were found, pieced back together, and it is one piece of evidence of the ferociousness of that battle. And we're going to talk about another ferocious battle on this program. The stones cry out this time from Beit Shean, one of the oldest cities in the world. It's 6,500 years old. It was a Canaanite city. Jericho, which shares the other end of the Jordan Valley with Beit Shean, is even older, but these are real old cities. The Philistines came north. They fought with King Saul at Mount Gilboa near Beit Shean and defeated him. And Saul and his 3 sons were killed in that battle. And in one of the less pretty scenes in Scripture, the Philistines found the bodies, and I read from 1 Samuel 31, verse 8, "It came to pass on the morrow when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent into the land of the Philistines round about to publish it in the house of their idols and among their people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth Shean." And the city is there today. It's an archaeological ruin. We'll have it in a future program. Professor Mazur emphasizes the destruction of the 10 tribes by Assyria. There's actual evidence of this happening to be found there in the digs. And such evidence as this supports biblical stories. That's a very old story, the Assyrians coming into Israel and carrying off the 10 tribes, but evidence of one of the battles that was key to that conquest is in the Scriptures. So now to Dr. Tom McCall of our ministry, who interviews Professor Amichai Mazar.
Beit Shean is located just west of the Jordan River, about 20 miles south of the Sea of Galilee. Known as Scythopolis during the Greco-Roman period, it was a member of the Decapolis, a league of 10 Greek cities created after the Roman general Pompey conquered Palestine in 63 BC. In Matthew chapter 4, we're told, there followed Jesus great multitudes of people from Galilee and from Decapolis. Mark chapter 5 relates how a demon-possessed man, after being healed by Christ, began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him, and all men did marvel. The archaeological ruins of Beit Shean are in 2 distinct locations. The lower city was established during the Hellenistic period around the 3rd century BC. The remains of this once magnificent city include extraordinary colonnaded streets, temples, Roman baths, and an imposing theater. Tell Beit Shean, the original location of the inhabitants here, lies atop this prominent hill. Tell is a term used to describe the remaining artificial mound that has resulted from thousands of years of destruction and rebuilding on top of the same area. It is here that Professor Amichai Mazar, an Israeli archaeologist with over 30 years of experience, unearthed the stones and structures which helped to validate the biblical record.
Dr. Mazar, it seems as though there are a lot of strata of occupation that we see in front of us here. Can you describe the various buildings that we have and what time period they are located
Yes,
in?
we are now sitting on the top of the mound of Beit Shean, and here just last summer we excavated buildings from quite interesting periods in the history of this place. This remains here, this pink mud brick building can be very well dated to the time of Solomon, 10th century BC. It's part of a larger building Much larger part of it was excavated back in 1925-26 by the University of Pennsylvania. We found another building on the other side of our excavation area from the same period. Just below it, you see in the lower level, we have this pavement made of basalt stones. This pavement and the attached wall, this wall here, are dated to the time of Saul, 11th century BC. Now we know from the Bible that after the battle on Gilboa, the body of Saul and his two sons was hanged by the Philistines on the walls of Beit Shean. We didn't find the fortification walls, they were completely eroded away, but this building is the only remain that we have up to now that can be clearly dated to the time of King Saul, and we may say that here is a part of this town which was occupied by Canaanites and perhaps taken over by the Philistines for a short while during this time.
Now, just to orient us, the mountains we see in the background, can you inform us what they are and the relationship to the story of Saul and his sons?
Well, the ridge which you see just behind us, this is the Mount Gilboa. Well, according to the book of Judges, the battle between the Philistines who arrived from Philistia, from south of Tel Aviv area, you know, the southern coastal plain, they arrived to here, and the battle was, according to this story, somewhere on this mountain or next to this mountain.
As mentioned earlier, King Saul's defeat is chronicled in 1 Samuel chapter 31. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. When the Philistines came, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa, and they cut off his head, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beit Shean. Professor Mazar continues the story.
Now the Philistines, according to the story, brought the bodies to this town, Beit Shean, and during the night, the Israelites from Transjordan, from the city of Ramoth Gilead, they crossed the Jordan, they came to here, they stole the bodies, they brought them to Ramoth Gilead, where they burned them and buried them. So this is a nice story because we can see from here where Ramoth Gilead was located. It's further to the east, yes, beyond the Jordan, these mountains on the eastern side. In a lower level, down there below and up here behind us, we excavated buildings from the 12th century BC, which are related to the time of the Egyptian government here. For 300 years, Beit Shean was the stronghold of the Egyptian government in Canaan. There was an Egyptian pharaonic officials, army units, which lived here, and from here they dominated the entire northern part of Israel. And we have good evidence for this. Monuments were found here, stelae, sculpture, statues, which you can see in the Rockefeller Museum, and we also found some buildings here from the same period.
We understand that several layers of destruction have been found at Beit Shean here, and that there may be evidence of the Assyrian destruction of the city that's been uncovered. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, in such a site like Beit Shean, where we have about 22 different strata, different cities, built one on top of the other during the ages, of course, in several cases we have violent destructions. And we found violent destructions in several cases here. One of the cases is down here, where we excavated the end of the Egyptian administration time, 12th century BC. The city was destroyed by very heavy fire. We don't know who caused this destruction. Another case is the end of the Solomonic city, also a destruction by fire. Here we have an addressee. We know that the pharaoh Shishak, a pharaoh, invaded this country 5 years after the death of Solomon. It is mentioned in the Bible, it is mentioned in Egyptian documents found in Egypt, and we found the destruction level here. So here we have again a kind of fitting together the Bible, the Egyptian document, and archaeological finds.
The invasion Dr. Mazar alludes to is found in 2 Chronicles chapter 12. And it came to pass that in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem, because they had transgressed against the Lord, with 1,200 chariots and 60,000 horsemen. And the people were without number that came with him out of Egypt, the Lubims, the Sukkiims, the Ethiopians. And he took the fortified cities which pertained to Judah and to Jerusalem. Although not specifically mentioned, it is Dr. Mazar's contention that Beit Shean also was overtaken at this time. A third layer of destruction representing the Assyrian invasion of Israel was also found. Professor Mazar explains the site.
Eventually, down here, we reached a building, a very interesting building, which was destroyed by very heavy fire, conflagration. We found here burnt beams, a lot of ash, a lot of broken vessels, broken pottery, metal objects, loom weights, etc. This building was destroyed by the Assyrian troops in the year 732 BC. This marks the end of the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes, the 10 lost tribes.
The Assyrian invasion is recounted in 2 Kings chapter 15. In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took Hatzor and Gilead and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria. Here we have another example of how we can relate a particular destruction layer with an event known to us from the Bible. Leaving Tel Beit Shean, we arrive at another city which Professor Mazar plans to spend the next 7 years systematically recovering. Tell Rehov, now a mute grass-covered mound rising from the Jordan River Valley, will soon begin to spew a fury of archaeological data covering over 4,000 years of history. Located south and east of Beit Shean, Tell Rehov excavations will begin in the summer of 1997. An excited team of Mazar students do a preliminary topsoil survey. Their goal is to collect sample artifacts from across the Tell, which in turn will help pinpoint the best places for them to dig. Mazar and his team are most interested in the city's earliest history, around the time of King David and the even earlier times of the Judges and Canaanites. Because it is impossible to excavate the entire 30-acre Tell, Professor Mazar explains the critical role pottery plays in deciding where to discover.
We have the first harvest of pottery from the first 10 minutes of collecting pottery on the mound, and this is the highest point, so we get the latest periods. And the latest period here, you see this green pottery here, this is medieval. We have some medieval occupation on the top of the mound. Post-Crusader, that's maybe 13th, 14th century AD, the Mamluk period, before the Ottomans conquered the country. You see this green glazed pottery. This is not what we want, really. You see here, it's too late for us. We want earlier periods. But here we can see pottery from the 3rd millennium BC, early Bronze Age, this one. And this one perhaps is from the time of the Israelite monarchy, Iron Age, I think so, this little sherd.
Students continue to pick the surface of the mound for telltale signs that will unlock the history of the numerous civilizations that lay below. Unlike a book, you can judge a tell by its cover.
Such pottery sherds can give us a clue as to the history of occupation in this particular spot. So we can plan our excavation. If we have these periods here and other periods there on the other part of the mound, we should be able to plan, to design our program so that it will fit our needs and our goals. Pottery is a kind of a text, you know. The pottery tells you about chronology, dates, because, you know, the style of pottery changed during the periods, during the ages. And we can use pottery to date buildings, strata, occupation layers, etc. So, for example, if I look on such a sherd, I can say more or less that it is from the 13th, 14th centuries AD. That means about 600, 700 years ago, okay? Mamluk period, that's after the Crusaders. But when I look on such a sherd, this one, even though it is not a very diagnostic sherd, not a very good one, because it's just a body fragment of a jar, you know, it has no shape, no rim, no base, nothing. Still, the material, the clay, the way, the wear, how this fabric was made, tells me that this could be 3rd millennium BC, about 5,000 years ago.
With the help of topographic maps and area photographs, 3 sites on the mound have been tentatively chosen. A grid system will divide the tell into 5 by 5 meter sections. Some 65 students and volunteers will be recruited to help meticulously unearth and record their finding. Professor Mazar and their team get one chance to do this right. Like a two-edged sword, archaeology not only cuts through the earth helping to piece together history, but it also destroys the site.
Archaeology is a destructive profession. We destroy when we dig something. No one can dig it again. So we have to record very well everything that we do on paper and photography, etc. And we hope that by conducting 6 or 7 seasons, each one 6 weeks, we shall be able to tell something about the history of this site and really know more about the ancient cultures in this region.
We asked Professor Mazar if one puts his faith in the Bible, can biblical archaeology help increase that faith?
Archaeologists in this country tend to say usually that they don't dig in order to prove the Bible. This is not the goal of archaeology, to prove the Bible. It's a byproduct of archaeological research. That means if we can dig and illustrate or prove something that is mentioned in the Bible, we are very happy. But not always it occurs, and it's not the major goal, because in our country we have many periods of occupation, beyond, even before the biblical period and after the Old Testament period and after the New Testament period as well. We study all of them. Now, when we can refer to the text, to the biblical text, and illustrate it, it's wonderful.
We wait with great anticipation for those wondrous illustrations as the stones, silenced beneath the smothering layers of sediment, prepare to cry out. When we return, we'll journey east to Jordan and the ruins of Pella. This ancient city was once a refugee camp for Messianic believers fleeing persecution and the destruction of Jerusalem.
Come with Zola Levitt and see for yourself the land of the covenant.
Other people said they went on cruises and trips like this, and it was all historical, and they saw a lot of sights, but this was spiritual, and this was really good. So I'm really glad I picked Zola Levitt's group to tour the Holy Land.
Tour the Holy Land with Zola Levitt. Call or write for more information.
Our tours, of course, stop at archaeological digs all the time, the big and famous ones, Megiddo, Masada, and come on along on one of them and see this stuff for yourself. It's unforgettable. You sure can't see anything like it in America, or just about anywhere else. Tom, Pachel is an old city. This is mentioned in the Old Testament. It was on the east side of the Jordan.
But it was one of the three cities of the Upper Jordan Valley, along with Beit Shean and Tell Rehov, and they vied for power over the Jordan Valley. And Pachel is first mentioned in a stele that was found in Beit Shean in the Egyptian times under Pharaoh Seti I. But it becomes important later on as a city of the Decapolis. And when the Greek soldiers, after Alexander the Great, came through and they found Pachel, they renamed it Pella after Alexander the Great's birthplace. And
just took the name of his Greek city and put it down
and put it on Pachel and made it Pella. It fit. But then it became important as one of the cities of the Decapolis, and it was on the east side of the Jordan. And when the pilgrims came down from Galilee, they would come by, and Jesus and his disciples must have come by Pella when they were going on their way to Jerusalem.
Tom interviewed our Jordanian guide, Abbas, inside the Greco-Roman city.
Much of the ancient ruins of Pella remain. Its only inhabitants are herds of sheep that move lazily through the ruins. We began our tour among the remains of the once magnificent Roman basilica, used originally as a court of law and public meeting place. Early Christians adapted them for their churches.
We are in the main church of the city of Pella, and this is which we call it the Old Roman Basilica, and it's the Basilica of the Byzantine. Basilica like in the Roman time, and it became the church, which is the main basilica of the city of Pella.
That's what these pillars are from that era?
This goes back to the Christian era. The big pillars over there, they go back to the Roman era.
And what about this fallen structure here? Looks like an arch or something.
Well, actually, this is the arch gate of the entrance of the basilica, which is from this side here, actually.
So that was the main
entrance
into the basilica.
Facing the west, coming inside the city, inside the church, excuse me, all the way down to the apse of the church on the eastern side of the church.
The apse shown here was the semicircular end of the building and was easily identified in churches of the Byzantine era. Also discovered here was an ancient Roman theater and aqueduct, as well as the most ancient part of the city. These ruins date from the time of the kings of Israel, some 3,000 years ago.
The Australian mission, which is excavating up there actually, excavating in the Iron and the Bronze Ages.
This was like during the time of the kings and of Israel and the judges and that time period.
That's right, which starts from the 12th century BC all the way to the Hellenistic time, 332 BC.
Pella, later conquered by the Romans, figured greatly in early church history. Messianic believers seeking shelter from persecution found their way here.
Well, they came mostly from Jerusalem, actually.
So they came from Jerusalem in the first century, something before the destruction of the temple there.
That's right.
And this was one of the places they came for refuge. What was life like for them when they came to Pella?
You talk about a very living city at the time. People used to live here. Like I told you, we're talking about the Iron Age, we are talking about the Bronze Age, we are talking about Romans before of them, okay? And during the time of Romans, they had come over here. So the city was so flourished, actually. And all these ruins which we see around us, they were flourishing. They were in their golden time.
And through this city, Jesus and his disciples had earlier come and walked through here on their way to Jericho and Jerusalem.
And this was one of the 10 cities of the Decapolis, the 10 most important Roman cities, which were built, and most of them were in Jordan, actually.
So it was very natural for the Christians from Jerusalem to find their way here and settle here and develop their tradition.
That's right. And I believe that we had many Christians who used to live here secretly in the city, and those had joined them.
And later, when Christianity became a legal religion, then they were able to develop the church buildings.
They started right away building, raising up their churches all around the city.
Yossi Ashkenazi, a Messianic believer who's been featured on our program before, has taken a special interest in Pella and the plight of the early believers.
Pella, or Falach, became a very important city after the destruction of the Second Temple, through the time of the Jewish people who believe in Jesus, who ran away from the pressure of the Romans and the Pharisees from Jerusalem. The Jewish people actually in Jerusalem start to execute these Jewish believers who believe in Jesus Christ, and many of them ran away from Jerusalem. Some of them went to Qumran, which they found a shelter in the desert, like many other refugees. And then is another city, which is in the other side of the Jordan River, which means on the east coast of the Jordan River, which they found a refuge place, hundreds of those Jewish people. For me particularly, as a Jewish believer, it was very important to understand what happened to these Jews who believe in Jesus Christ, who believe in the Lord, and to run away from the pressure of the Jewish people in Jerusalem. The prophesied of Jesus in that time was so important, so high, that the Jews believed very much in the Messiah. And that is one of the reasons why the Jews left Jerusalem, because they couldn't live, they couldn't stay, because of the Jewish and the Roman pressure in Jerusalem.
You know, Yossi, as a Messianic believer, has a point. That is, the Messianic believers, just like him in the time when the Romans laid siege to Jerusalem, had to go somewhere. And as a matter of fact, they had a prophecy advising them to do just that.
The Lord warned them about this situation.
Yes, in Luke 21:20, he says, "And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let them not and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. In other words, Jerusalem was anathema.
And there the Jewish people were there in Jerusalem and in Judea, and the Lord had told them to flee, and they fled, and they went to...
The ones who believed in the Lord
Right.
certainly fled. And that started a Christian community at Pella.
And this is recorded in history by one of the very earliest church historians, Eusebius, who lived in Caesarea, by the way. And he wrote that these Jewish believers were ordered to leave the city before the war began and settle in a town of Perea called Pella. To Pella, those who believed in Christ migrated from Jerusalem. So they actually obeyed the warning of the Lord, and in mass they left Jerusalem. It must have been something of a procession almost, and went out across the Jordan River and then up the Jordan River to the city of Pella. And there they remained. They were there for some time, and there developed a Christian history right there in Pella. They had bishops and everything for many centuries afterwards.
Yeah. And Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Lord God, creator of heavens, Lord God, we bring forth your praises. The earth stands a tribute to glory.